Hello, it's 6:15 on Monday evening, and I had mentioned that if no one showed up by 6:15 in any given office hour night, I would sign off. And I was about to sign off when I thought perhaps I should probably spend a few minutes reiterating the discussion question, because I had two questions this afternoon about what was on Blackboard. So let's just speak to that. And what I will do too is speak a little bit more by reviewing the same PowerPoint that I reviewed yesterday on Sunday's video. I'm extrapolating from specifics, which is always a dangerous thing, I know, but I got the idea that not everyone had particularly looked at the Sunday video in order to answer the questions for today. So I really urge you to take a look at the week, whatever the week number video is. I try to do that on Sunday, so no later than Sunday. And so you have some kind of overview what the class topics will be about, notwithstanding the fact that you also have it in the syllabus. And for the moment, I expect my being able to stay relatively close to what the syllabus is, but also knowing me and knowing how I recognize what classes directions may blow me to. It may be that we'll slow down, we'll move faster as time moves on. But in the beginning, clearly we're trying to leave the train rather slowly so that we don't get mixed up. Excuse me. So the question basically was, and I'm paraphrasing it, was you've already done a terrific job. Excuse me. Pardon me. You've already done a terrific job with the discussion question. I think virtually all of you did a great job with that. All of you did a great job with that. The only thing I would mention is some of you, several of you, but not the majority, was that you should also try to find some other additional research, whether it be from the book itself or from another article, something that you may run across, or something that I post for you to substantiate your thinking with some quotes. So that's an expectation that I need you to adhere to as closely as you can, although I'm not going to hold your hands to the fire every single moment about that. So with that in mind, the question was, you've already analyzed systems thinking insofar as the health of your organization. For the most part, you were pretty optimistic about most of the healths of the organization across those five places: shared vision, systems thinking, mental models, personal mastery, which you're absolutely and obviously responsible for in your role as HRM folks, and the fifth piece being team learning, which I also think is without a doubt part of your responsibility, more than you may have realized. So those are the five disciplines in a learning organization, which we've spoken about several times, and we'll be repeating throughout the semester. So you did a nice job with that, and then we have to begin to see where all these pieces begin to fit. So the first piece that I introduced to you is this concept of futuring. Yesterday I mentioned that I hold futuring near and dear to my own academic and personal chest in more ways than you can count. I've got two books out about futuring that I didn't require, but I think I may have recommended if you have any deeper interest in it as such. And I can recommend some other authors better than me that also speak to futuring. One would be Andy Hargraves, and another one who's kind of the dean or the godfather of all futurism premises would be Cornish, last name Cornish, like the hen. I think his first name was Edwin. But there's other ones too that are really very well done. McGonagall is one I'm just finished reading, actually, is also very good. So if you have a deeper interest in that, the more you know about futuring, the better HRM person you're going to be. I will guarantee you that. And so that's why I introduced this premise of future. Now, I'm talking fast because I'm getting excited. Futuring is as much a disposition and a cultural practice that permeates the entire organization. It doesn't just lie with you as the HRM person, or with your boss, or a couple of high-paid executives in a conference room. Futuring needs to be embedded across all pieces of the organization, or all levels of the organization, and through all the silos that, as some of you mentioned that word, all the silos, the tubes that often isolate parts of the whole with a W from each other. It's got to be part of what we do. And as I also said yesterday, we future all day long. we're born to future, although our brain is not wired to future very well, according to McGonigal. I think she showed good research about this. Say that our brain is not particularly wired to think much past a couple of years. Anything up to, especially up around 10 years, is very difficult for us to do, although you can't do it. And I mentioned some examples of that in yesterday's video, and I want to emphasize that point. In a sense, you're responsible for getting folks to think past 2 or 3 years, past 2 or 3 months, as too many people have done, as you know. Go back to the pandemic, and I'm not being political. I'm just I am offering you a viewpoint that you can reject or accept. When the pandemic first hit us between the eyes, the truth is, obviously, we weren't ready for it. We didn't pay attention to all the folks who were saying, be ready for a pandemic sooner or later. We weren't ready for it. And then when it did hit, you heard all the predictions. It's going to last forever. It's going to go away tomorrow. Not to worry. It's going to hit only the weak people, the old people like me, and so forth. And what people were doing with, pardon the French, putting together what I would call half-ass projections, because they didn't even have time to apply the futuring principles, LES principles, that need to be applied for true, deep, purpose-based, futures-based, three-dimensional forecasting. Again, we're not that good at it. In other words, I remember mentioning in yesterday's video that one of you works or worked for in the civil service, I think in the city, and I'm dying to find out what that person thinks about how well they future. And I'd like to know more about that, but I'm going to wager that governments aren't nearly as good at futuring as we think that they are. School systems certainly aren't. I think organizations, to some extent, are probably better at it than others because they do some market research at least and try to see what trends may be out there. But even then, that's not consistent. Not consistent. I think the example I used somewhere along the line, and I'll say it briefly, is the example of Blockbuster. Hopefully most of you, maybe some of you are not, old enough to remember Blockbuster. That was the era of the video cassette. And that was the era when people were opening up video rental stores on every corner. Blockbuster is the best example of that. Where on Friday nights, people would race to the Blockbuster, the local video store, to rent the nearest, most popular video that had just come out that day, perhaps, and was responsible for most of the market sales that we're going to have that night. And Blockbuster people did very well financially for a fairly long time until who comes along but Netflix. Now, the original Netflix wasn't in the business of things that they're in the business of now. What they did then was they were mailing out DVDs. They got past the video cassette recorder. Realized that wasn't going to last forever. The next best thing was DVDs. And so they began to mail DVDs out to people so that people didn't even have to go to a store to go pick it up. And what happened to Blockbuster? Blockbuster does not exist anymore because Netflix beat them to the punch in anticipating the probable future. And Netflix, being a pretty smart company for the most part, from my reading about Netflix, so that even that DVD system they had put in place wasn't going to last forever either. And they were the first of these streaming services to jump into that premise, where now people spend an awful lot of time, I know we do, increasingly in my own house. Here's a good one, Hulu, H-U-L-U, the streaming service, murders in my building. I'll give you your money back for the month if you don't like that one. But back to the show. And that would be that streaming, the DVD, rather the streaming, the streaming services and the shows that they produce by buying up old shows and by producing their own content is what makes them the powerhouse that they are today. An example of a system, an organization with the 5 learning discipline systems in place, especially systems thinking, especially future. And now the question then becomes, now, how does systems as I said yesterday, which is, I think futuring is probably a subset of systems, but I'd like to keep them separate. How does systems and futuring mesh? And up the road, the next week's question will be, how does systems, how does futuring, how does decision making, how does culture all come together for us to truly recognize the strengths of the organization in which you work? And what does this suggest for your obligation to create training programs that make everybody mini futurists up to some extent? So I want to reiterate that point. So your point now is to take the system, think of it as a Venn diagram. You need to recognize what you've gleaned about systems disciplines, learning disciplines, and then weld it or cross-match it, I guess is a better way to put it, with future. Now, we did a little bit of that. That's why I'm going to reshare the screen for a video that I did, for a PowerPoint that I did yesterday. But just briefly, I don't mean to spend all night on this if you've already seen this. And again, I reiterate that you should watch it, the week introduction video early on in the week. If you wait till Saturday or Sunday, that's going to be a very long day for you in so many respects. So with that in mind, what I did for you yesterday, I'm going to take the other side of the coin now. I recommended for you to realize that an organization to compare what an organization looks like with futuring practices, skills, and dispositions versus an organization that doesn't have the futuring practices, skills, and dispositions in place. Yesterday, I talked about the with, spent a minute on the withouts. And so an organization without futuring practices and dispositions built into their culture, built into what they do, their systems, disciplines, I submit, would be very vague. All right. Shared vision would be lacking, inconsistent at best, and the mission would be some kind of dark and fuzzy thing that we can't particularly get our arms around. Without futuring practices, how does that affect the ability of the organization to think creatively, which is another task you're going to have to consider along the way throughout the semester in your assignments? And that would be, how can they be creative if they can't shed old habits? How can they co-create? How can everyone get together and say, let's build a better mousetrap, let's build a better spoon, let's build a better engineering program. Think about what we're going to do when roads don't exist anymore. I'm sorry, when we have driverless cars. Come on. If we don't have futuring dispositions and practices in place, what can we expect from collaboration among everyone? Well, if you don't have those competencies in place, you really can't think together. And one of the discussion responses somebody posted, I posted a phrase that's got two parts to it. It's an old Japanese business phrase, I'm told, which begins with, none of us is as smart as all of us. And that sounds really cute, and everyone likes to embrace that premise. Sounds very cute, very nice. Except that sometimes a group can be really stupid together, dumb together, make emotional-based decisions that are not based in data, and make some terrible decisions. And we've seen that in elections, we've seen that in jury trials, we've seen that in behavior of groups all around the world. And so when we think about collaboration, we need to recognize there are some, and we'll talk about this later in the semester, there are some variables that have to be in place for a group to be able to collaborate that presume that futuring is their middle name. Which goes back to the most singular premise here, and I saved it for last, and that would be about whether an organization has the cultural capacity to change. Now, cultural, I've said before, it's not about whether we're Italian Americans or Chinese Americans or any particular ethnic group. We're talking about the shared beliefs, hidden assumptions, values, and artifacts that group culture creates to represent their culture. What it's really about, or what it thinks that it is about. But if the organization doesn't particularly emphasize futuring, it will be an organization that reacts rather than proacts rather than futures. So this little chart gives you a sort of a heads up on what this is about. And let's go back a little further with some other thing. I talked about what forecasting meant yesterday in yesterday's video. And I said in the beginning, if you would use this as a system that you would want to bring in, or someone you would put into to begin to teach the whole group to do this, there are 3 phases. There are really 5, but the first 3 are getting information, learning how to think, forecast 2-dimensionally, and then learning how to forecast 3-dimensionally. And then we go on to explain it. For information gathering is probably the easiest to understand. And I like the phrase, it's not mine, I got it from, I forget who right now. What do we know? What do we not know? What do we not know that we do not know that we need to know? That's the scary part, isn't it? And so what you would be responsible for is to come up, you would more likely than not be responsible for coming up with an information gathering system. Futurists really do chart those things. They look at, I don't like to use this word too often, but they look at the trends. Trends are a dangerous forecasting tool, by the way. There's other tools you can use. They look at the trends. They take it to the world out there, as I've emphasized in yesterday's video a great deal. And then they use a variety of activities to recognize what all this looks like, and then more importantly, what we think it means. Which brings us to the next place. And here's some ways you as an HRM person could engage your groups in these things. If there are any questions about them, I'll be happy to answer them in a private Zoom. And basically what they're looking for are the root causes. What I call the 5 whys. I'm going to save that for today. We'll do more of that when we do the collaboration, where we use strategies to drill down to the true root causes we're trying to solve. How many conversations have you been in one-to-one, both informally and formally, where people start throwing their shoes at each other, and then someone finally says, well, what is it that we're trying to get at? What is the bottom line? I don't know the answer to this, but I'm not. You can answer it between your own ears on this. I think I know, but I'm not going to say what I think. What is the root cause for how the pandemic overwhelmed us, or causes? If you use the 5 why technique, believe it or not, when you ask a why question 5 times properly, you'll get close to what the root cause or causes might have been. Doesn't enable you to solve it, what happened 3 years ago. But it does perhaps enable you to solve the next one, and there'll be a next one. I don't know what it, God forbid, what it will be, but you can expect that to happen, because we can expect that to happen. And what would we be able to do now, because of how our foresight's improved? We've got some muscles connected to that to make that happen. Then we go to once you've got that nailed down, you really try getting close to what a purpose may be, and then so the next progression would what we would call 2-dimensional cause and effect. Cause and effect. Well, I voted for person X, and that's why we have a tax cut. I vote for person Y, and that's why we don't have wars. I voted for her because I like her position on ABC. What you're really saying, I voted for that person because I want the effect to be the you want a different effect. You want the cause of your voting to affect something else. So it talks about a lot of premises, and it has great momentum towards moving you towards a deeper causes and effects, and ultimately to 3-dimensional thinking. There are other strategies. There's the futures wheel strategy, which you can look at more closely here. It's kind of fun to do, and I probably will do it down the line, but for now I won't. You can take a look at it yourself. I think I did model it yesterday. And then a better strategy, well, here's the futures wheel. I did do this yesterday. And then another strategy that takes it to the next level is what we call cross-impact matrix. And matrix is a fancy word for a chart, cross-impact chart. So if, for example, we're looking at school satisfaction, and we think that the probable future is that the achievement levels are only going to change because no one's doing anything about it. Well, how does that affect students, parents, community? What does it mean about shared vision? if the teachers are going to be dissatisfied with that, or your employees are dissatisfied with their professional development, what does it mean for them, for the shareholders, for the customers you serve? That's how it works. And you'd be surprised what will come out of this once you play it through. And I believe that's where that stops. So we'll leave it at that. What I want you to consider is that, and I used some of these phrases before yesterday, there are 3 P's to futuring: what's possible, what's probable, what's preferable. Almost everything is possible. Fewer things are probable. And that's where you've got to put on your thinking caps and weigh all your information, slice it and dice it, share it among others, use collaborative leadership practices for people to feel comfortable to share with each other and create new ways to think. And then you've got to decide, well, these are 3 or 4 probable futures I see. Somebody was telling me the other day at a party that the Chinese and the Americans already know they're going to have a war in the next 20 to 30 years, and they're preparing for it. That's a probable future. Is it a preferable future? Not for my grandchildren, it's not. But for your own families. Do we have to accept that probable future? And if so, what do we need to do to create decisions now to reduce that probability to a more preferable one? And you think about your own organization for which you work. Will it be in existence 10 years from now? Why? Why will it not be in existence 10 years from now? Now, I'm going to presume that you want that organization to continue in 10 years, even if you're not working there anymore. I'm going to presume that. And if that's the case, what do you need to do to train your stakeholders, your customers, no, not your customers, your colleagues and your workers, to give them the skills to think future in order to be better employees? Not only for themselves, by the way, but also for the organization that pays their bills, so to speak. That's what this is all about. And so what you need to do is this time, sort of using this hand, take the pulse of your organization in a different way. You took the pulse of its health across the 5 disciplines. Now I'm asking you to say, well, where do I hear the word future? How does the word future, or thinking ahead, planning ahead, how does it fit into the conversations and into the actions of that group? Is it distant, different, non-existent? Are people smacked down for not allowing us to consider a potential probable future that the boss doesn't want to hear about? These are things that all have to be going into the beaker to be boiled down and distilled for when we get to needs analysis and needs assessment. Those are the kind of things we're looking at. So I'm hoping this addition to what I said yesterday gives you even more insight to the premise of futuring. And if you're interested in more about it, I mentioned a couple of books, but if you have a question or something, feel free to talk to me. I will bore you to tears because as you can hear in my voice, even though it's scratchy right now, that I'm really interested in this. And it's kind of like my mission to get people to think better that way. One of the reasons for that being, I don't think I'm a really great futurist myself. Otherwise, I still have hair and I'd be 50 pounds lighter. Okay, so disappointed I didn't have a chance to meet with anybody today, but I'm going to presume that no one got on because they didn't need to hear my golden words. And that's okay too. But I am going to record this, and I urge, even though you won't hear the video until I post it, I am going to urge all of you to make the time to watch this for the second part of what we talked about today, just to kind of embellish the premise, the concept of futuring even that much more. Okay, I'm signing off.